Hey, and now it's time for the further adventures of Ryder and Mr. Self. School was canceled. The roads were caked in a sheet of ice. Long ago, everyone had retreated home to wait out the worst Mother Nature had to offer. Ryder looked out his window and thought, today should have been report card day, a day of celebration for all little boys and girls. With the ice, all the students would be forced to go the entire weekend without final grades. You know, Ryder said to Mr. Self, who was, of course, right by his side, some of those kids, especially the gifted ones, rely on those grades for their self-esteem. Gracious, Mr. Self said, without those grades, they'll be like diabetics without their insulin shots. This is serious, Ryder said. Mr. Self, we've got to save those kids and get them their grades. Just then, the governor appeared on television and told the state that he had authorized the police to shoot anyone stupid enough to get out on the roadways. Well, that certainly complicates matters, Ryder said once he heard the news. I don't suppose Santa could come for his second visit in a month. Even if he came, Mr. Self said, he wouldn't know the way to most of these kids' houses, especially Ava's. Ryder decided to off-road it. He and Mr. Self jumped into their ATV and took off towards the school. Even though they were off-road, they still had to dodge the gunfire from property owners who shot first and asked questions later. How are we supposed to get into the school? Ryder asked once they arrived. Remember the oranges, Mr. Self said. Ryder had forgotten, but after reading a great poem about fruit a couple of days ago, Ryder had stored a couple of oranges as door holders in the back entrance, in case he ever wanted to walk with a girl. The rest of the day was a breeze. There was still gunfire, but the joy of children's faces when they realized what Ryder had brought more than made up for the danger. Moreover, several families invited Ryder and Mr. Self in for milk and cookies. As we all know, milk is a precious commodity during an ice storm, but these families were willing to share because they had been given the greatest gift of all, grades. Look here, Mama. Emma Ray done made all A's. Call her out of the barn. She don't have to live there anymore. Hey, yo, my baby Dennison made all A's. Yo, that's off the chain. Thank you, young man, for bringing Dawson's grades. I can now get my lawyer to begin the arbitration process towards that middle school and that dreadful gifted teacher. Here, have a cookie. I was going to give it to the dogs since it's store-bought and not made by the help. Hooray! Pacey's finally eligible for softball. Pacey, get your glove and get in the 4x4. We have all day to work on the way ice affects the hop of a ground ball. I'm sorry, Ryder. You and your imaginary friend traveled all this way for nothing. We returned Kaysen to the orphanage this morning, and it just wasn't working out. Ryder and Mr. Self were nearly through with their deliveries when they got to one poor child's home. His name was Jacob, and he suffered tremendously under the legacy of his brilliant older brother, J.P. F's again, Jacob. What in the great state of Canada is the matter with you? Go get my bat. Ryder stepped forward. Excuse me, ma'am, but I'd like to be a grade donor for your son. Turned out Ryder was an exact match for their son. He had the same classes. Still, Jacob's family was nervous to accept. What would Ryder do without those grades? Trust me, Ryder said. I've got good grades coming out the wazoo. Is that possible? They asked. Sure is, Ryder said. Mr. Self keeps my wazoo packed with good grades because I learned so much from him that occasionally my wazoo overrunneth. By the time the day had ended, Ryder and Mr. Self had saved the grades and the day. The kids were free to make ice statues of their grades. Some made statues of Ryder and Mr. Self, too, but they wouldn't have made a good grade on that work, for ice sculpting wasn't an elective class. The end.